In the news tonight, the Prime Minister and heads of medical associations discussed the Medical Accountability Bill and accreditation of health institutions. Iraqi forces capture Mosul airport as the battle for the city intensifies. And the Syrian government and opposition negotiators sit face to face under the UN flag for the first time at the Geneva peace talks. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Prime Minister Hani Molki discussed with heads of professional medical associations a draft medical accountability law and accreditation of health institutions. The meeting, attended by the Minister of Health and the State Minister for Legal Affairs, also touched on various issues related to the sector. Molki told the doctors, dentists, nurses and pharmacist associations that any amendment to the Medical Accountability Draft Bill should protect the profession and support patients who might be affected by medical mistakes. He said the government has stiffened penalties against those attacking public servants on duty, including doctors and nurses. The Prime Minister stressed the need to enhance the capacity and efficiency in the health care sector and guarantee the rights of the recipients of service. Separately, the Prime Minister said reform should be comprehensive and not partial. Partially addressing a certain defect could lead to other defects arising, Molki warned. In an interview with the Al-Ra'i daily newspaper, Molki said political reform began years ago upon the directive of His Majesty the King that led to constitutional amendments and setting the powers of the state's authorities. He said the government this year began reforming local administration and will next month start a plan to explain decentralization to avoid errors in both implementation and responsibilities. He also said the government is committed to not to overburden poor and low-income groups or raise the prices of basic commodities. Addressed a wide range of domestic issues in the interview, he said the government is keen on forging the closest possible relationship with the lower house. Molki also said the reopening of the Terbil crossing on the border with Iraq is in its final stages. Jordan and Canada signed a $7.58 million grant to Jordan to support the education sector and help it cope with the burdens arising from the Syrian refugee crisis. The Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, Imad Fakhoury, and Canadian Ambassador Peter McDougall signed the agreement. Fakhoury said the grant is part of a $25 million aid package to Jordan, pledged by the governments of the United Kingdom, the United States and Norway at last year's London Donor Conference. In a separate meeting with the US Millennium Challenge Corporation MCC Vice President Fatima Soumar, the planning minister stressed the importance of providing support to vital projects in areas affected by the Syrian refugee crisis. Fakhoury said the government appreciated the MCC for grants it had provided and helped the kingdom to address the impact of water shortages. US-backed Iraqi forces captured Mosul airport as the battle for the city intensifies. The fall of the airport is a major gain in the campaign to drive Daesh terrorists out of the western half of the city. Troops advanced with helicopters, strafing militants' targets. Here's more.
Iraqi security forces, backed up by US troops, captured Mosul airport in a major gain in operations to drive Daesh from the western half of the city. A strategic victory they claim in their months-long siege of the militant group's last stronghold in Iraq. They plan to use the captured complexes as staging grounds for a surge deeper in the western part of the city. Elite counter-terrorism forces advanced from the southwestern side and entered the Ghuzlani army base along with the southwestern districts of Tar al-Rumman and al-Ma'mun. More civilians were fleeing towards Iraqi forces from the district of al-Ma'mun. Some of them were wounded. Federal police and an elite interior ministry unit known as Rapid Response had battled their way into the airport as the terrorists fought back using suicide car bombs. Police officers said the militants had also deployed bomb-carrying drones against the Iraqi counter-terrorism forces advancing from the southwestern side of the city. Fighting is still ongoing and the advance continues, said one commander.
Forces of the Counterterrorism Service, 9th Armored Division and the Federal Police advanced according to plan. Federal police forces advanced towards the airport while the troops of the Counterterrorism Service advanced in two directions. The first towards Al-Ghazlani base and the second towards the districts of Tel Al-Rayyan and Al-Ma'mun. Fighting is still on and advance continues.
Iraqi commanders expect the battle in western Mosul to be more difficult than in the east part of the city, in part because tanks and armored vehicles cannot pass through narrow alleyways that crisscross the city's ancient western districts. Caught between those two forces are hundreds of thousands of men, women and children. Wounded civilians are poured out of the district carrying their personal belongings. Civilians who fled their homes said the airstrikes in Al-Ma'mun district intensified at dawn.
There were many militants, but when airstrikes intensified at dawn today, some fled when Humvees of the Counterterrorism Service arrived. The Daesh militants lost control and pulled back towards Al-Ma'mun. We tried to head to Al-Ma'mun, but were afraid of the shelling and we decided to escape towards the Humvees.
A humanitarian situation that will only escalate in the heart of the city. The campaign, involving a 100,000 strong force of Iraqi troops, Kurdish fighters and Shiite militias, has made rapid advances aided by new tactics and better coordination. Losing Mosul would spell the end of Daesh on the Iraqi side of the militants' self-styled government in Iraq and Syria. Late Shanqiti for the news at 10.
Syrian government and opposition negotiators sat face to face under the UN flag in Geneva for the first time in 3 years. UN mediator Staffan de Mistura told negotiators that Syrian people want a new road out of this nightmare and a future that addresses their legitimate aspirations. More in this report.
In a low-key start to the first UN-led peace talks in almost a year, Syrian negotiators arrived separately to meet UN mediator Staffan de Mistura. De Mistura noted that the time is not perfect for solving the Syrian crisis, but the meeting is a key step into the peace talks.
We were just discussing with the special envoy that it is time. I don't know whether the time is ripe for a real agreement, but it's time to start a dialogue. Because there is a ceasefire, and secondly, there is an opportunity now to take advantage of it.
De Mistura said that he doesn't know the views from all parties, but the final aim of the talks is to help ensure the Syrian opposition and Syrian delegation to talk. The UN mediator plans to discuss Syria's future governance arrangements, the process for drafting a new constitution, and a schedule for elections under UN supervision. China welcomed and supported the fourth round of Syrian peace talks. De Mistura noted that China is playing already a big role. They are members of the International Syria Support Group. A spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said China expects the Syrian government and the opposition will further eliminate differences, build on mutual trust, and make the talks fruitful at an earliest possible date. The scope of the talks has been cut down to core political questions since last year, after a new initiative by Russia, Turkey, and Iran took thorny military issues off the Geneva agenda and transferred them to a separate process in the Kazakh capital Astana. Rana Hassan for the news at 10.
In northern Syria, Turkish-backed rebels seized the center of the town of Al-Bab from Daesh. Turkish defense minister said the rebels have seized control of almost all of the town and are now working to find and clear mines and explosive devices laid by the militants. The Free Syrian Army fighters have been attacking Al-Bab since December, aided by Turkish warplanes, tanks and special forces. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group said the rebels had taken full control of Al-Bab and of the two neighboring towns. Yemeni forces made gains around the Red Sea coastal town of Makha in heavy fighting with Houthi militias overnight. They pushed back the pro-Iranian Houthi fighters in Taiz as they rebuffed a counter-offensive by the militia. 7 soldiers and 16 militants were killed in the fighting in Makha, and 12 soldiers and 28 militants were wounded. Earlier, Fighting also broke out between the government forces and Houthi militias outside a military camp in the southern province of Taiz as the other soldiers entered the Red Sea Yakhtul village. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said more than $4 billion are needed by the end of March to help nearly 20 million people who risk starvation in Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan and Yemen, citing armed conflicts and climate change as part of the reasons for the food emergency. Guterres led a call for a $5.6 billion in funding for humanitarian operations in the 4 countries this year. Of the amount, $4.4 billion is needed by the end of next month to avert what he called a catastrophe. Yemen, where more than 10,000 people have died as part of a 2-year-long conflict, is facing the largest food insecurity emergency in the world, according to the UN.
I'm here with my colleagues to draw the world's attention to the fact that today, more than 20 million people in South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and northeast Nigeria are going hungry and facing devastating levels of food insecurity. Famine is already a reality in parts of South Sudan. Unless we act now, it is only a matter of time until it affects other areas and other countries. We are facing a tragedy. We must avoid it becoming a catastrophe. This is preventable if the international community takes decisive action. Between humanitarian and development.
A bomb blast in a shopping center in Pakistan's eastern city of Lahore killed at least 10 people. An official said authorities were investigating the nature and motives of the blast. A Punjab police spokesman said the explosion was caused by a bomb that was detonated either remotely or by timer. Security forces cordoned off the site of the blast. Some of the world's biggest stars will shine even brighter at the Academy Awards with the help of diamonds. The practice of borrowing gems for award shows is exciting for both jewelry companies like Forever Mark Diamonds and the A-listers themselves. This year, the company set up what they are calling a diamond house to showcase options. The process of loaning jewelry starts with a celebrity stylist pulling potential pieces. During this award, earrings and cuffs have been the big trend.
Looks like a diamond.
Britain's Mark Cavendish won the first stage of the Abu Dhabi Tour in Medina Zayed after a sprint to the line. The 31-year-old team dimension data rider completed the 189-kilometer course, which runs entirely in the desert, in 4 hours, 37 minutes and 6 seconds. Cavendish managed to avoid a big crash with 1 kilometer to go that injured several riders, including Owen Doyle, who picked up a nasty road burn on his leg. Friday's 153-kilometer stage takes the riders from Al Maraya Island to Big Flag. Drivers Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas unveiled the new Mercedes F1 2017 car, the FW08, on the track at Silverstone. Britain's Hamilton, world champion in 2014 and 2015, is favoured to top the series again and take a 4th world champion title. Finland's Valtteri Bottas in his new teammate, joining from the Williams team. Mercedes are still the team to beat after winning the Constructors' Championship 3 years running, with their drivers taking the drivers' title for the last 3 years. And finally, the weather forecast called in the hilly areas, Badia and Eastern Plains, and also chilly in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, with an overnight low of 9 or 10 degrees. Frost formation is in the forecast after midnight in southern highlands and Badia. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, with pleasant conditions in the hilly areas and relatively warm in the Dead Sea. The max temperature in Amman will hover around the high of 18 degrees. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm day Friday with high clouds, northerly winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end here our top stories once again. The Prime Minister and heads of medical associations discussed the Medical Accountability Bill and accreditation of health institutions. Iraqi forces capture Mosul airport as the battle for the city intensifies. And the Syrian government and opposition negotiators sit face to face under the UN flag for the first time at the Geneva peace talks. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Leo Balkar. Have a lovely weekend.